For over 2,000 years, the world has been captivated by one of history's most haunting questions. How did Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, truly die? Ancient writers told us it was the venomous bite of an asp, a dramatic end befitting the queen who once defied Rome. Shakespeare turned that story into legend, immortalizing Cleopatra as a tragic lover who embraced death rather than surrender. But what if that story was wrong? What if the aspie was never there at all? What if Cleopatra's death was not the act of free will we've always imagined, but something far darker? Something orchestrated, concealed, and rewritten by her enemies? Modern science has begun to pull back the layers of this ancient mystery. Archaeologists have combed through the ruins of Alexandria. Forensic toxicologists have reconstructed poisons available in the 1st century BCE. And geneticists working with the fragile remains of Cleopatra's bloodline have asked a chilling question. Can DNA help us uncover the truth of her final hours? What they've discovered challenges everything we thought we knew. The evidence does not simply shed light on her death. It forces us to reconsider Cleopatra's entire reign, her enemies, and the lengths to which Rome went to erase her story. Was the Queen of the Nile a victim of her own hand, or the final casualty of Rome's brutal propaganda machine? Tonight, we will peel away the myth. We'll trace Cleopatra's final days, revisit the rumors, examine the poisons, and explore what cutting-edge DNA and forensic science reveal about her dynasty's health, her family's decline, and the very real possibility that her death was not a suicide at all. This is the dark truth behind Cleopatra's death, and the lies history has told us ever since. Cleopatra VII. Philopator ascended the throne of Egypt at just 18 years old, inheriting a kingdom that was already fragile. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, had ruled for nearly 3 centuries. But by Cleopatra's time, its power was crumbling under the pressure of Roman expansion. Egypt was wealthy. Its grain fed much of the Mediterranean, but politically, it was vulnerable. Cleopatra understood this from the beginning. Unlike many of her predecessors, she was a ruler of intelligence and charisma, fluent in multiple languages, skilled in diplomacy, and determined to preserve Egypt's independence. She crafted herself as more than a monarch. She became Isis reborn, a living goddess who commanded loyalty not only through power, but through myth. Her reign, however, was inseparable from her alliances. With Julius Caesar, Cleopatra secured her throne during civil war. With Mark Antony, she attempted to forge a future where Egypt and Rome could coexist as equals. These choices made her both revered and reviled. Roman writers painted her as a seductress, a manipulator who lured their greatest generals to ruin. To the Egyptians, she was the last hope of resisting domination. The end came swiftly after Antony's defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. With Octavian, later Augustus, closing in, Cleopatra's position collapsed. Antony fell on his sword, and Cleopatra, imprisoned in her mausoleum, awaited her fate. The official story, spread first by Roman chroniclers and later sanctified by Shakespeare, was that she chose death by asp rather than be paraded in Octavian's triumph. But this narrative raises questions. Ancient accounts disagree on the details. Some say a snake hidden in a basket of figs, others suggest a poisoned ointment, still others whisper of assassination. Even Octavian himself had reasons to promote the story of noble suicide. It made him appear merciful, sparing him the spectacle of executing a queen before the Roman crowd. Modern historians now argue that the snake story was too convenient, too theatrical. No physical evidence of a serpent was ever recorded. The symptoms described, swift death, little visible struggle, do not match what we know of cobra venom. Instead, toxicology points toward carefully prepared poisons. And DNA analysis of the Ptolemaic lineage hints at hidden genetic vulnerabilities that could have shaped Cleopatra's health and decisions. To understand the truth, we must revisit her final days, piece together the conflicting accounts, and weigh the science against the legend. Because if Cleopatra did not die by her own hand, then the greatest queen of Egypt was not a tragic lover, but the victim of a carefully staged murder. In the summer of 30 BCE, Cleopatra's fate was sealed. Octavian had captured Alexandria, Antony's forces had collapsed, and Egypt's sovereignty was slipping away by the hour. Cleopatra withdrew into her mausoleum, a monumental structure she had prepared in advance, not only as a tomb, but as a sanctuary. Ancient writers describe her as barricading herself inside, surrounded by treasures, determined that if she was to fall, she would not fall cheaply. The days that followed are recorded in conflicting detail. According to Plutarch, Antony, misled by false news that Cleopatra had died, stabbed himself with his sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to her refuge, where he reportedly died in her arms. Cassius Dio and Strabo add variations, but the common thread is Antony's desperate suicide, Cleopatra's grief, and Octavian's final tightening grip. After Antony's death, Cleopatra's health and spirit reportedly declined. Roman accounts describe her refusing food, lying on a simple mat, and speaking little. Some suggest she suffered from headaches, fevers, or fainting spells in those days, symptoms that do not fit a snakebite but could align with poisoning or severe psychological trauma. Her attendants later testified that she had begun experimenting with various toxins, testing their effects on prisoners and even animals. This image of Cleopatra as a scientist queen, calmly studying poisons while awaiting her end, has fascinated historians for centuries. The final hours remain murky. Octavian visited Cleopatra personally, attempting to persuade her to live. According to Suetonius, he promised her safety and leniency if she would march in his triumph. But Cleopatra, proud to the last, is said to have refused, knowing that such a spectacle would erase her dignity forever. Shortly afterward, she was discovered dead, lying on her golden bed, her crown still upon her head. The traditional version blames the ASP. Ancient sources describe 2 faint puncture marks on her arm or breast, yet others report no marks at all. The supposed snake was never shown, never proven, and practical questions abound. How could a snake be smuggled into a guarded mausoleum? How could she ensure it would strike her and not her attendants? And why would death have come so swiftly when cobra venom typically produces a slower, agonizing decline? The inconsistencies are glaring. Rather than a clear narrative, what we see in these accounts is a story shaped by politics, theater, and rumor. The symptoms, rapid death, little visible suffering, absence of obvious wounds, suggest a different explanation. One involving carefully prepared poisons, perhaps even administered with the help of her attendants. But could Cleopatra truly have engineered such a controlled exit, or was she given no choice at all? For 2 millennia, the Oasi bite has reigned as the most famous theory of Cleopatra's death. It was simple, dramatic, and visually striking. The queen who embodied Egypt, killed by Egypt's sacred symbol. Roman propagandists adored this version. It turned her death into theater, a spectacle that reinforced their story of a dangerous foreign queen destroyed by her own exotic choices. Shakespeare later immortalized it, ensuring that for Western audiences, Cleopatra's hand would forever clasp the serpent of her undoing. But even in antiquity, not everyone believed it. Strabo suggested a poisoned ointment or sharp instrument might have been used. Other writers speculated about a toxic drink, an easier, more controlled method than wrestling with a cobra in a guarded chamber. Still others whispered that Octavian himself ordered her quietly poisoned, ensuring both her death and the survival of a narrative that suited him. Poison was far from uncommon in the ancient world. Cleopatra herself was rumored to have experimented with aconite, hemlock, and opium. Roman sources feared her knowledge of toxicology, painting her as both dangerous and cunning. It would not have been beyond her ability, or beyond her enemies' interests, to use such substances in her final moments. The assassination theory is equally compelling. Cleopatra alive was a political problem. Cleopatra dead, framed as a tragic suicide, was a solution. Octavian avoided the scandal of killing her outright, but still reaped the benefits of her removal. The suicide story gave him moral cover, portraying him as merciful, even as he annexed Egypt. Which story is true? Suicide by asp, poison by choice, or assassination disguised as self-inflicted death? Each theory reveals less about Cleopatra herself and more about the agendas of those who recorded her story. The Romans needed a queen who was dangerous but defeated. The poets needed a heroine of passion and tragedy. The truth, as always, is harder to pin down, and more unsettling when science enters the stage. When archaeologists turn to the ruins of Alexandria, they hope to find physical traces of Cleopatra's end. But centuries of earthquakes and floods buried much of her palace beneath the Mediterranean. Divers recovered fragments of statues, coins, and temple columns, but Cleopatra's body and tomb were lost. This absence has fueled both mystery and myth. Without a grave, without remains, we are left only with texts, biased, contradictory, and incomplete. Still, indirect evidence builds a case. In Egypt, snakebite deaths were not typically rapid or painless. Cobra venom attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis, difficulty breathing, and eventually suffocation, a process that could take hours. Roman accounts, by contrast, describe Cleopatra's death as swift, almost serene. This mismatch raises immediate doubts about the ASP story. Toxicology provides alternatives. Ancient sources mention Cleopatra's fascination with poisons. Mixtures of opium, hemlock, and aconite were known in antiquity, producing sleep, coma, and death far more peacefully than venom. A prepared poison could be hidden in a drink, salve, or even a hollowed comb. One story claims Cleopatra pricked herself with a poisoned hairpin, small, discreet, and effective. Science also enters through the study of other mummies of the Ptolemaic dynasty. DNA analysis of Ptolemaic and related remains suggests high rates of genetic illness, possibly due to generations of sibling marriages designed to preserve bloodlines. These findings raise the possibility that Cleopatra herself carried vulnerabilities, perhaps affecting her resilience against illness or toxins. If her health was already fragile, even a modest dose of poison could have ended her life quickly. Isotopic studies of mummies from the era reveal diets rich in fish, wine, and imported luxuries, foods that could have facilitated the delivery of toxins. CT scans of related mummies show evidence of vascular disease, infections, and congenital issues, adding to the picture of a dynasty weakened from within. No remains of Cleopatra survive for direct DNA testing, but forensic modeling combines textual evidence, toxicological knowledge, and comparative genetics from her lineage. The result? The ASP story collapses under scrutiny. In its place emerges a darker, more plausible scenario. Cleopatra died not by snake, but by a calculated act of poisoning, an act that may have been her final assertion of control, or the final blow dealt by Rome. Ancient DNA is fragile. Time, heat, and humidity shred the genetic code into fragments so small they are almost unreadable. In Egypt, where the climate is harsh and the Nile floods buried tombs under layers of silt, the survival of DNA is even rarer. For Cleopatra herself, no confirmed remains have ever been found. Yet scientists have not given up. Instead, they turn to two paths: the genetic study of her dynasty and the forensic chemistry of poisons that might still leave molecular traces. DNA research on the wider Ptolemaic lineage begins with what little evidence survives. The dynasty practiced inbreeding, often marrying brothers and sisters, to keep the royal bloodline pure. Modern studies of related remains, though fragmentary, suggest the cost of this practice was high. Genetic markers linked to bone fragility, immune weakness, and congenital disease appear in other mummies from the late Ptolemaic and early Roman periods. Such weaknesses could have made Cleopatra more vulnerable to illness or toxins, raising the stakes of her final days. On the chemical side, forensic toxicologists have attempted to reconstruct poisons available in Cleopatra's era. Ancient texts describe ointments, salves, and mixtures used both for medicine and for murder. By recreating these recipes in controlled labs, scientists discovered combinations of hemlock, opium, and aconite that could cause death within minutes. These toxins leave behind telltale chemical signatures in hair, nails, and bone. If remains were ever located, modern labs could detect them even after 2 millennia. The methods are painstaking. Samples must be drilled from dense bone or molar teeth. In sterile labs, technicians in sealed suits amplify tiny fragments of DNA, copying them millions of times until a sequence emerges. Maternal lines are traced through mitochondrial DNA, inherited unchanged from mother to child. Paternal ancestry runs through the Y chromosome, passed from father to son. Autosomal DNA, though more scrambled, can reveal traits, vulnerabilities, and even predispositions to disease. Although Cleopatra's own body remains lost, the combination of genetic insight from her relatives and chemical analysis of poisons paints a consistent picture. The ASP story does not fit. Instead, science points to deliberate toxicology, whether by Cleopatra's hand, her attendants, or her enemies. For centuries, people wanted the story to be simple. Cleopatra, proud to the end, embraced the snake and chose her destiny. But science refuses simplicity. Step by step, forensic evidence dismantles the myth, Snakebite is inconsistent with the symptoms described. No serpent was ever produced. The logistics of smuggling and controlling a cobra inside a guarded tomb are implausible. DNA studies of the Ptolemaic line suggest a queen with fragile health, already weakened by inherited illness. Toxicology recreations demonstrate poisons far more effective than a reptile. Historical accounts show contradictions, with some writers hinting at ointments or sharp instruments rather than serpents. The most plausible explanation is this: Cleopatra died by poison, not by snake. Whether she chose it herself, as an act of defiance to deny Octavian his triumph, or whether she was forced into it by Roman agents, the outcome is the same. Her death was staged, her dignity preserved for the public story, but the truth hidden beneath layers of propaganda. This is the turning point. The legend of the asp crumbles. What remains is a darker truth. Cleopatra's final hours were scripted not by nature, but by human hands wielding toxins, politics, and power. The revelation forces us to rethink Cleopatra's legacy. If she was poisoned by her own command or by Rome, then the most famous suicide in history was not a free act of love or pride, but a carefully managed spectacle. This changes how we see her, not as a romantic heroine who died for love, but as a ruler silenced in the final chapter of her reign. Historians debate what this means. Some argue Cleopatra's agency remains intact. Choosing poison was still her way of escaping humiliation. Others counter that the Romans engineered her death, then spread the snake story as propaganda. Octavian needed her gone, but he also needed a narrative that made him appear merciful. Suicide suited both purposes. The DNA evidence of dynasty-wide genetic decline adds another dimension. If Cleopatra's health was compromised, her choices may have been narrowed by weakness. Illness, pain, and vulnerability could have made her more susceptible to manipulation. This too challenges the legend of an all-powerful queen dying on her own terms. The debate will never be fully settled. Yet the science destabilizes the oldest myth, showing how politics, rumor, and biology collide in history. The story of Cleopatra's death is not just about one woman. It is about how empires create myths and how modern science can strip them away. Beyond the science lies the human truth. Cleopatra was more than a queen. She was a mother, a strategist, a woman who carried the hopes of a dying kingdom. Her death, whatever its exact cause, was the end of Egypt's independence. With her gone, Rome annexed the land of the pharaohs, turning a proud civilization into a province. The irony is brutal. Cleopatra spent her life crafting her image, Isis reborn, a goddess in flesh. She fought to control her narrative, commissioning art, manipulating ceremony, and projecting power. Yet in death, her story was stolen. The Romans reduced her to a cautionary tale of lust and ambition, Shakespeare to a tragic lover undone by passion. The reality, illuminated by DNA and forensic science, is harsher. Cleopatra's final days were not a noble romance, but a slow dismantling of her dignity, her body weakened by genetics and grief, her fate sealed by politics. The myth promised immortality. The body tells another tale of pain, poison, and power stolen in silence. Still, Cleopatra endures. More than 2,000 years later, she fascinates us because she embodies both strength and tragedy, myth and humanity. In her story, we see the collision of empire and individuality, of legend and evidence. That is why we still search her ruins, still test the DNA, still ask the same question: who was the real Cleopatra? So, what really killed Cleopatra? The asp? The poison chalice? The unseen hand of Rome? Science points away from the snake and toward toxins, deliberate, calculated, and politically convenient. The truth is not the clean legend we inherited, but a darker reality in which power decided how history would remember her. But what do you think? Was Cleopatra a queen who embraced poison to control her own fate? Or was she silenced by Rome, her death staged to serve Octavian's triumph? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, because history is not only what the records say, but what we choose to believe. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden science and secrets behind Cleopatra's death, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Ancient Secrets, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. Next time, we'll explore another mystery that DNA has finally begun to solve: the shocking truth behind the boy king, Tutankhamun,